So that's the story of Targa Florio. I wholly recommend getting married, bringing a crocodile back from your honeymoon, drinking poisoned cat's blood and meeting the minister, because, I mean, how else are you going to spend 200 quid on it?
Tonight, I pay another visit to motoring journalist Rich Duisberg, who in our first video kindly shared some unbelievable stories from his book Confessions from Quality Control. Based on his time as a sales rep visiting car factories in the 1990s, it included everything from faking meetings at Volvo just to try the food, to severed digits in brand new factories, and accidental masochism at Porsche. That book quickly became one of my automotive favourites, and I was delighted when he agreed to share a few stories on camera for your enjoyment, because I was certain that you'd love them as much as I had. And it turns out I was right. Your feedback from the first video was amazing. As a result, I have strong-armed him into a second piece, where he talks about material from his follow-up, Nothing Handles Like a Rental Car, detailing his exploits of motoring adventures around Europe on a shoestring budget and in the shadow of motoring legends. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story of a World War I fighter ace and his Morgan three-wheeler, the newspaper tycoon who brought racing to the British Isles, and a cat blood-drinking occultist so evil that Mussolini threw him out. And don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video but haven't seen the first, please check that out after, and to hear even more tales, please make sure to buy the books, both of which will be linked in the description and comment section down below, and are available from Amazon for a very reasonable sum.
So my name is Rich Duisberg. Actually, my name isn't Rich Duisberg, and those who have watched the last interview that we did together will know that that's a nom de plume that I adopted when I had quite a serious job and wanted to distinguish between my my day job, sort of professional measurement engineer testing cars in the 90s and seeing how well they were all built, and fannying around with cars, which is what I love doing. So this interview really, I suppose, is to move on from my first book, Confessions from Quality Control, and it kind of follows my life, because I started to earn quite a bit of money, bought some interesting cars, which I think we've talked about previously. Nothing outrageously fancy, but, you know, good, solid, fun stuff. And I started to do some track days, and track days are good fun. You know, a lot of people enjoy them. It's a huge industry and so on. But ultimately, you are driving around in a circle on a wet airfield for what? So kind of the novelty wore off a bit. And I think I may have mentioned previously, it was a session at Bedford, and it was wet like it's always wet, and it was windy, and there were cones, and I got through a set of tyres. I'm not even entirely sure what I was actually driving, maybe an MX-5. I absolutely love MX-5s. And I thought, I probably spent 200-300 quid. And I was a bit fed up, and the weather was rubbish, and, you know, English food and all the rest of it. And I thought, you know, I've always fancied a stab at Stelvio. So you get the map out, and you see how far away it is, and you think, I could go and do that. But then you quickly come to the realisation that it's an exceptionally long drive to get there. And if you make that part of the adventure, that's fab. But I want to do a lot of this very often. So it wasn't like my once in a lifetime, once a year lads trip kind of a thing. I wanted to do more, because I realised there are other destinations. So I thought, well, I'm going to wear my car out. You have to go through Belgium. I have to come back to Belgium in a minute, and this may upset many Belgian viewers, but hey. And I kind of totted up the cost and realised it would be cheaper to fly there. That was the gist of it. I suppose I ought to wrap up on Belgium, really. To get from the UK, and I'm in the Midlands, so to get from the UK to continental Europe pretty much means either going up to Newcastle, getting a ferry crossing, or Dover for either a ferry or the Channel Tunnel crossing. And if you're going over to Germany for the Nürburgring or down to the Alps, you will probably drive through Belgium, and that means the E40 and Brussels. And Brussels is the worst place on earth for traffic, and it's like you should be all excited because you're abroad and you're travelling, and really the traffic's absolutely horrendous. The potholes galore, so you bend your rims and flat tyres before you even get there, and it's just, it sucks the joy out of going. And if I can make a parallel that probably very few of your readers will relate to, but those that know will probably laugh their socks off at this, it's like the nearest bit of seaside to here in Leicestershire where I live is Skegness in Lincolnshire, which is really quite an ugly place. So you have all of that driving to get there, and you get there and it's an anticlimax. This is kind of the opposite. This is like, you know, you're excited to get there, but the journey kills the enthusiasm of going. It's like going to Skeggy. It just sucks the joy out of you. So anywho, I set a notional budget of 200 quid to have a trip, and I mean 200 quid for everything, to get from here in Leicestershire to Stelvio, to drive up Stelvio and back in the mountains, in the fresh air, to look at the hairpins and the mountains and soak all of that in that we just don't get anywhere else in the world, particularly not in the UK. So it really is very, very simple. It's a very simple recipe. Ryanair, so minimum, no bags, no nothing, no extras. And top tip is to wear all of your clothes. So I actually have done that before. So put your spare shoes in your coat pockets, put your coat on, put your hat on, 3 shirts, 3 t-shirts, 3 pairs of pants, walking through like some kind of weird Michelin man. I've done, you get some strange looks, but it saves you like 20 quid on bags. So I sort of set to this 200 quid, fly down to Bergamo, which is what Ryanair call Milan, but really it's about as Milan as Stansted is to London. It really isn't, but it's a beautiful city actually. Bergamo's great. And then rent a hire car. Now you'll know that if you rent a hire car, normally on the desk, I understand, careful choice of language, disclaimer talk there. I understand that the boys and girls on the desk get a commission if they upsell anything. So do you want to rent a sat-nav? Do you want to return it full of fuel? And do you want to have a zero insurance excess waiver? So they get a commission. So they're always trying to upsell that. In this instance, I outwardly appeared like that idiot customer that went, yeah, I'll just have everything, please. That's great, because I knew full well where I was going with the car and what I was going to get up to might be a little bit saucy. So they're a business. That's how it works. So at this point, I should also explain that I wasn't on my own. There was a small group of us that were a little bit fed up of driving in circles in the rain and ruining our own cars, and thought, let's get some Italian sunshine and go and get some fresh air and see the place. So there were 6 of us. And as luck has it, Hertz had just taken delivery of a colossal batch of Fiat 500s. If you flew, obviously the car that's still in production now, if you flew to Italy and rented a car, you were going to get a Fiat 500. So it looked like we planned it. It looked like 6 identical black Fiat 500s all charging up towards the Alps. And it was sort of look more than judgment, really. And we just went at it. Now, I've seen a lot of people will complain about Stelvio. We've all seen it. You've seen the photography, but I needed to see it. And it's like there's quite often the snow at the top, and that's an exciting thing. So to have a snowball fight as a grown man when you should be at work is just, hugely stress relieving. It's a very positive thing. A lot of people would complain because you get camper vans, and there always seems to be a German registered camper van that's as wide as the road that you're stuck behind, or hardcore cyclists. And of course, everybody's entitled to use this road. They're going for the same reason as me, because it's beautiful. But if you time it right, you go early in the morning, so fly down to Bergamo, stay overnight at Bormio, which is at the foot of Stelvio, nice little town. Accommodation in Italy is really cheap, the people are friendly, the food's good, and they all know what you're up to. And then up the mountain first thing in the morning is just absolutely, it's breathtaking. Going up a mountain is not that difficult. You're just pinging off the limiter, essentially. And the Fiat 500 got that weird rear beam suspension it shares with a Ford Ka, so its arse kind of bounces around a bit as you're driving up. But because your expectations are so low, because it's a rental car, it's actually hugely good fun. You forgive it and you enjoy it, its quirks and its foibles. So I came away with quite an affection for the Fiat 500 and the Panda related to it and the Ka and all the rest of it. And I actually think they drive quite nicely in a way. And also, and it's very, very yobbish, and I really don't care, but the sound of scrubbing rubber, that on your tyres, hairpin, after it's tornati in Italian. In fact, I nearly cocked up the first turn because it said tornati, and I did Italian at night school years ago. I think, I can't remember what that means. What does that mean? And then I thought, well, it's in a triangle. So oh, shit. It was like, oh, that's what it means. It means hairpin. And I'd realised that triangle means danger universally and tornati means a hairpin. So I kind of got that wrong. And we zigzagged up the hill and it was great. And you sit at the top, you get your sticker for the car boot and take it in. Down the other side, if you then head northeast, which is the view that most people seem to take a photograph of, but not as many people drive down, the town at the bottom of there is where Gunther Steiner from Haas is from, and I would love just to doorstep him Sunday, just have him swear at me. I don't know why, but that's one of my bucket list things, is to be swore at by Gunther, because he's brilliant. But of course, the failings in these cars really are brakes. They're designed to run around cities. They're stop-start cars, and they're designed perfectly for that. That's what they're made for. So ringing their neck up a hill is bad enough, but downhill, it's amazing how quickly you will cook the brakes. And particularly if you tow up and you've got a bit of luggage as well, there's a bit of weight in the car. You really, all of that braking effort's into the front pads and discs, and it's fun to see the smoke come off, but it really isn't any fun at all when the brakes fade and like you've got nothing left. So not scary, because you don't want to be at the point where you're totally misbehaving on public roads. But by the same token, you're going to hit nothing other than maybe an eagle if you fall off the side. So, you know, it's no problem to really go at it. And it was an amazing trip. Stayed in Bergamo, had some amazing food. And it's a city I've learned to love and I go back to fairly frequently now, not just for car shenanigans. And we took the cars back. And of course, the staff there will cast their eye over it. Now, normally, probably, we're all the same, that you would normally rent a car, you'd take it back and you want a receipt on the spot, because what you don't want is, you know, oh, somebody's keyed it and it wasn't you, and you can't argue the toss. So to me, I think get a receipt when you've returned the car, then there's no debate afterwards and you're not arguing with a call centre to get your money back. But because we had paid the insurance excess waiver, we had no incentive to hide any of the damage. And in fact, it isn't that we deliberately went out to damage the cars. I have to talk about that in a minute. But these cars all got bent. All of them got bashed, pranged, bent. You know, they all had war wounds, shall we say. But I don't want some family, and I've got kids, I don't want somebody to rent it after me and have an accident. But because I paid the insurance excess and somebody's made a nice little commission off me, I'm happy to say, well, you've got a space saver because that tyre blew out. And yes, there's a scrape down there. Like, literally, we lost a door handle. I know that door handles snap on Fiat 500s, but it was a brand new delivery mileage car, and it got out and there was no door handle on the outside at all. I don't even know where. So I apologise for littering in the Alps. I don't even know where that went. And lots of other bits and like the staff there were kind of understanding. They were like, oh, you were very unlucky. And I'm like, yes, we were very unlucky on two wheels up Stelvio. So that was great. When I got back to the UK and friends started sort of talking about the trip, and we'd had just a whale of a time, and it did genuinely come in at under 200 quid. It absolutely was. I think it was 60 quid a day for the car, 2 days, accommodation, flights. It was like 190 something. It's even like I took chocolate bars, so I didn't spend money whilst I was there. Not that I couldn't afford to, but it was like, I need to get this under this. Like in my head, I've got Bedford, and it needs to be cheaper than Bedford and better. So we did that. And a friend of mine, Manky Cheng, came along, who's just one of the nicest people your viewers will probably never meet. He writes on Caterhams, and he was writing at the time for Practical Performance Car magazine, and he said, oh, they'd love this. And I said, is this not a bit oikish for them? And they went, no, that's right up their street. So I mailed them and said, I've just done this. And they were like, that's been brilliant. And Will, who was the editor at the time, was a very sweary bloke, and he said, well, give us a story. So I did. I wrote it up, and I thought they won't print this, and they did. And then they gave me some money for it. Not a lot, and it probably just about covered the trip. And I thought, wow, not only can I do this for less money than something less exciting in the UK, but I can actually earn some money from doing this, and I can actually get paid. So when I submitted the feature, they said, what are you doing next? And I thought, all of it, frankly. So I've got a bit of a thing about historic motorsport. So I love forgotten racetracks and forgotten circuits. And if you poke around on YouTube, you'll see some very, very bad videos I did for Carfection years ago, like forgotten racetracks of France. And I love exploring the topography, because many early racetracks and motorsport venues were actually public road, because they were, early races were like Paris to Arras, I think it was, and some of this, so long distance. And they're basically, it's not so much a race, it's more a test of the reliability of the vehicle, because 120 odd years ago, the vehicles were fairly flaky. So manufacturers wanted to demonstrate that they were reliable. So they would race from city to city. And of course, there were hardly any laws on speeding on the roads and whatnot then, and it was all very glamorous. So that really blossomed. Then, of course, we got into the purpose-built places like Monza and Brooklands and so on, which, of course, closed to the public. But these racing on public roads things quite appealed to my inner yobbo, so I quite like that. So the idea of visiting these venues and tracing the roads and looking for tiny little shreds of history is really, really exciting. I really enjoy that. So I would imagine everybody's seen Reims, at Goo, if I pronounce that correctly, the old F1 circuit just to the west of the city, and the beautiful grandstands and the faded signage and the plaster peeling off the walls and so on. Is just an amazing place, and you can almost drive that entire circuit. It's just a triangle. So I got into, and the top of the triangle is now rather annoyingly cut off by a field, but anyway, I will someday. I will someday do a full lap. I might need a 4x4 for that. So I got into doing these venues, and of course, when magazines started to pay me for these stories, it really fueled an addiction that I've still got to this day. My next trip had kind of a British Leyland flavour to it. So as fun as Stelvio had been, it was really just for the scenery and those endless, beautiful switchbacks that had just... I've done it many times since, and it's fab. But I kind of wanted to retrace a little bit of motorsport history. So I wanted to do Paddy Hopkirk's win in the Monte Carlo rally, which was, I mean, that story's been told many, many times before, but the bit that really got me was what they called the Night of the Long Knives, which is the final stage from in the bottom end of the Mercantour National Park, which is like Sospel, down into Monaco. And they called it the Night of the Long Knives because the lights sort of shone through the gloom and the snow, and it was I mean, an amazing spectacle long before I was born. And I'd read these in magazines and books, and I had others enthused about the story. And I've got a bit of a thing for minis as well. I contacted a rental company and said, hey, I put your cars in print because others were starting to follow in my footprints from what I'd done at Stelvio. I had a lot of people saying, how did you do it? Where did you go? I mean, not that it's difficult, but, you know, just a bit of guidance. So I said, you've probably got a lot of people doing this now, and please can I have a car? And to my surprise, large rental company that eventually banned me said, yes, of course, no problem at all. What do you want? I said, what I really want is a Mini. So they said, yes, certainly, no problem at all. So same formula. I EasyJet from Luton, which is the world's worst airport. I've been to Russia, I've been to Africa, I've been to China, I've been all over. Luton is where there was, you know, if I'm knocking at the pearly gates and the big fella decides that I've sinned and he wants to punish me, I will be held in the departures hall at Luton Airport. Hateful place. Anyway, cheap flight, so that's all good. Flew down to Nice Airport to be greeted by an exceptionally well-dressed chap holding a board with my name on it. And one of my, this is really childish and I can't believe I'm admitting this on camera, but I'm going to. One of my pleasures, because I fly a lot, when you land at an airport and you see a taxi driver holding a sign like for, I don't know, Mr. Mohammed or Mr. Smith or Mrs. McDonald or something, I always like to make eye contact and go, and then just veer off at the last minute. And it's really childish, but I absolutely love doing that. But anyway, in this instance, Mr. Duisberg, actually my real name, on a board, and they provided me with a Mini. Now, it was a, obviously it's a BMW spec Mini, right? I'm not that old. So it was a Mini convertible automatic, which is like a kind of a name that gets worse the more as it goes on. Mini convertible automatic. But hey, you know, they laid it on for free. And I said, I'm going to tell the story of Paddy Hopkirk. I'm going to retrace that route, get up to Sospel, photograph in front of the church, revisit the Col De Turini and all of those famous stages and get some photographs. And they were super helpful. And they provided me with a car. So me and my best mate, Daryl, which is his real name, I don't mind getting him into trouble. Daryl, arrest him, don't arrest me. Took the Mini, we started right up at the top of the Mercantile Park and we followed the original route back. And Minis are great for that. Minis weirdly make brilliant rally cars. Now, I'd done a number of things in order to be close to Paddy Hopkirk and the ethos of them doing it as I could. Now, they started, the rally started, it was actually endurance rally. Not a lot of people know this. It isn't like everybody knows the Col De Turini and the Monaco bit because that's the end and the photographs and all the rest of it. But Hopkirk started in Minsk, behind the Iron Curtain, and others started in Glasgow. I think some started in up in Scandinavia somewhere, because as long as you travelled the same distance to get to these stages, it didn't matter where you went. So there are a number, you could choose where you wanted to start. So that was kind of weird. So I'd like to draw a parallel between Minsk and Luton Airport, but that's probably way more racist than I'm allowed to say on camera. But it's it has charms of all the charms of an ex-communist airport. Anywho, so he started there and drove down, but they took a number of precautions because of the snow. When we went, it wasn't snowing. It was cold, but it wasn't snowing. But he filled the washer bottle with gin because he didn't want the washer bottle to freeze. So my mate Darryl and I had kind of argued who was going to drive, because we're doing this on the cheap, even cheaper if you split the rental cost between the two of you. And basically, we had a bit of a pathetic fight in the car park, like give me the keys. We did all of that. And I said, I'm going to drive and you can navigate. Now, Darryl was a geography teacher, but he couldn't find his arse with both hands. His sense of direction is appalling. So I'd taken a bottle of gin with the view to empty the washer bottle and filling it up just like Hopkirk did. And Darryl drank it. So when we're sort of bombing around in the mountains looking for some kind of, I didn't expect, easy 200 over crest, fast right rally talk, but at least wanted, you come up to a T-junction, mate, slow down a bit. He was leathered, so he was really no use whatsoever, and he was a bit sick in the car, which wasn't great either. So we went out expecting to be like Hopkirk and Liddon and following in their footsteps, and really we're just a pair of scruffy blokes from the Midlands running around. But it was a wonderful, just a great place to go. And there's an awesome photograph you can take on the Col De Turini where you park the car and then climb up the mountain behind and look down at it, and you see the roads. The key difference, of course, between doing Stelvio and Col De Turini is they've both got wonderful switchbacks, but that area, the roads there's a colossal variety in road surfaces, in cambers, in corners, in altitude, and even the weather, because you're in very steep valleys. So one side will get the sunlight and the plants will grow and it's beautiful. The other side, the sun will never quite reach. It's quite barren and it's slippy. And I loved all of that. And I'm no rally driver. I can't drive for toffees, is the truth of it. But it's wonderful just balancing a little car and wringing its neck against those driving conditions. Or you could go to Bedford. Other airfield circuits are available. So again, that was just a tremendous trip. Hertz, we tried it on as well because we finished in Monaco, which feels like absolutely amazing. And there's a hotel, and it's the Columbus. The Hotel Columbus was one of the cheaper, fancy hotels. So I said, we're doing a feature. We're journalists from the UK. I'm not a journalist. I'm just winging it. So we managed to get a really fancy room there as well. And they said, they thought we'd brought original minis. Then they see this rented thing with one of the wheels was bent, and I think we managed to bust a headlight, and they were almost like, well, don't park it here, but move it out of the way. So I think they rumbled us. And Hertz were I think they were not Hertz, it might have been Avis, it might have been Budget, it might have been Europe Car, were quite good about returning, and I think they appreciated the coverage. But I think at that point they realised that in addition to encouraging people to take driving holidays, because that's essentially what this is, they're also worried about encouraging people to be rally drivers, which is what we were trying to do. So that sort of made it very difficult for me to book things for quite some time after that. So I got one of those, not legal emails, but it was written in a language that I don't think came from the desk of the sender. I think it came from some lawyer somewhere about brands and behaviour and all the rest of it. So that was another slightly spicy thing that happened on that trip. Was we took some photographs in the old town of Monaco, where the palace is. Now, if you've got a Monaco registered car, I refuse to say Monegasque because that makes me sound like a tit. If you've got a Monaco registered vehicle, or one registered in Nice, I believe, you're actually allowed up in the old town. But of course, we were taking photographs, so the police stopped us, and apparently you need a photograph to professionally take pictures up there. And they were quite unfriendly, it has to be said, considering that we were just mooching around there taking pictures of how beautiful everything was. They were a little bit sniffy. They said, you've got to delete all of your footage. And I was like, I don't really want to do that. And the police, in the end, they let us go and they said, you just have to tell us that you've deleted the footage. And I said, well, in which case I'm telling you. And the guy said, well, at least pretend that you have deleted the footage. Okay, look, whoops, there's the delete. But of course we didn't. And that was a really great trip. And again, that went to print. And I think not only did we cover our costs, I think I actually made a few quid off of that trip as well. However, the jeopardy was that the rental companies were starting to get wind of what I was up to. And it was, as I mentioned, it was quite difficult to book the cars I wanted in the places that I wanted. Fortunately, not all of the rental companies spoke to each other. So for my next little jolly, we had a workaround. It's also reasonable to say that I had one or two friendly contacts on the inside with the rental companies who kind of tipped me off to bits and bobs because they thought this was quite entertaining. And I think those watching that might sort of question the use of the cars, it's important to recognise that you go for the journey first. It isn't, you may as well just buy something and smash it up if that's what you want to do. There's no fun in that. It's using the car in a risky, exciting place where you wouldn't use your own. And I'm fairly sure that some of these rental car employees have, barrel rolled and a spas in Gatwick long stay before, or far worse than I've gotten up to. But anyway, that's my excuse. So I had a tip off that there were some Arbath 500s at Inverness Airport. And I'd always wanted to go and do Applecross Pass, or Bealach Nabar, I think is the Gaelic name for it, which makes it sound... I like using the Gaelic name because it sounds like you're really going abroad and it's really foreign and exciting when it is still in the UK. And yes, you can drive up there, stick it in your sat-nav, see how long it takes there, look at how miserable the M6 is, look at all those speed cameras and all that horror and think, you know what, it's EasyJet again. So flew up to Inverness, and I had booked a car, and they had one Arbath, and it was for me, which was absolutely great. Now I had to take them a bit of a gift as a thank you, which I did. I was true to my word, but that gift was booze and chocolates actually, so it wasn't a great bribe. I've tried this since. I've tried ringing desks in place and saying, I'm pretty sure you've got an XYZ on the fleet. My name's Mr. X and I'm coming to rent it. And they say, Mr. X, who are you? I have to give my real name. Sorry, that's childish. And it hasn't worked since, but it worked beautifully here. And Applecross is the closest thing to an alpine road you get in the UK. You've got, Snake Pass, Woodhead Pass, great driving roads all over the UK, but not spectacular. And Applecross is absolutely spectacular. Now, I had a problem because we got there late, collected the car, and it's quite a long drive because Inverness is more sort of central to the east of Scotland, and of course Applecross passes over on the west coast. So we got there quite late, and I took a friend of mine called Carlos, and he ended up with a Corsa. He must have really upset somebody, but anyway, he had a Corsa, and he had an accident on the way, and he hit something in the dark because it's very narrow lanes, and entirely on him, should be looking where he's going. And he's a Mancunian, and he said, "You see that? I've hit a thing." He was sort of in shock. I've hit a thing. So, what was it? And of course I'm thinking, my God, I hope he's not hit somebody. He said, I've hit one of them big hairy bastards. What he meant was a sheep, and he didn't have... He was a city boy, and he was addled, and he didn't, so he hit a big hairy bastard. So that killed the Corsa. So we all then squeezed in the Arbath and went in Applecross. So we stopped at... There's two ways you can go at it. You can go sort of around the coast from the north, or over the pass from, I think it's Strathcarron is the name, but some years since I've done it, from the south. And we stopped at the Applecross Inn, which is a lovely place, fantastic people. Scallops were just amazing, great whiskey. I don't even drink whiskey, but it was really good. And then one of the locals said, "What are you here for, boys?" And we told them. They said, "Oh, well, it's closed. The Applecross is closed at the minute. It's being resurfaced." So this will probably date when I was there. And we thought, can't be shut. We've come all this bloody way. We're going to go and have a look. So we went up in the middle of the night. We drove up there, and there were a few cones, and you think, oh, we'll just move that to one side and we'll go and have a look. And then we actually dropped the two front wheels into a chasm where they'd not only resurfaced the road, but they'd excavated the road. So I'm not exaggerating when it's like a 4 or 5 foot trench across the middle of the road. So, I mean, the good thing with the Arbath 500, it's a very light little car. So we sort of bounced it out and went back with our tail between our legs. So the car was okay, but we'd done the usual thing of ticking the insurance excess. And I think the guys and girls on the desk knew what we were up to, because why else would I ask for a specific car and everything else? And they were very good about it. But that was the point at where I really had to get quite devious in order to get my hands on a car. So I can't say that I've done the Applecross Pass, because I haven't. I've done 50% of a car's wheels into a ditch on the Applecross, but I never actually completed it. So that was that. After that trip, and bearing in mind these are coming quite thick and fast now because I'd really got the taste for it, I wanted to do Europe's highest road. Now, there's different ways of calculating this, but the metric that I took was that it had to be a public road, and it had to be a through road, i.e. not a dead end, because I think otherwise you're up Mount Tidy or somewhere in the Canaries. But anyway, and this is Col De La Bonette, which is about 2,500 metres up. So consider that the highest, I think the Cairnwell Pass in the UK is something like 600 metres above sea level. This is at least 4 times as high. But there was a bit of rivalry over the years between the French and the Italians and possibly the Swiss as to who had the highest road. And of course, these are countries where everyone's very proud of their infrastructure and so on, a lot of national pride at stake. So Col De La Bonette wasn't the highest. And the local council had twigged that there was another road nearby that was higher. So, and if your viewers have been there, they'll see this. But you drive up and it's a 2-lane road, and there is a little bit of traffic on it. It's not like absolutely like Atlas Mountains deserted. There are people up there, but not lots there. It's beautiful traffic, 2 lanes, and then you see like a little cut-off that goes around the corner. And the French put that in deliberately because that just takes it that few metres higher in order that it actually sets the record. So they've spent, I mean, look at the UK, you know, you can't even get potholes filled, whereas in France, they would spend probably a huge amount of money getting excavators and asphalters and stuff to lay a road just around the corner that loops back and joins you back in the same spot, just so as it's the highest road in Europe. So I went up there in it was a Hyundai i30. What is it with Hyundai where it's a brand that I would imagine many people, certainly in the UK, have called Hyundai for years, and it's a fairly well-established brand. And now we're told to call it Hyundai, which is fine, because I'm sure that's how it's supposed to be in Korean. But all they're really doing is pointing to the fact that that's quite a difficult brand name. That's like Kodak. You pick a name and you stick with it because it's easy to say. Anyway, I had a Hyundai, and that was actually a really, really, really nice car to drive. Didn't overheat, didn't cook the brakes, nothing. So the drive up there, I did the same route as previously. I flew down to Nice. I collected a car from a different company. My co-driver slash ballast had booked in their name, so I didn't get rumbled at the desk. But then I had a thing for altitude because, like, we're in the Midlands, we're in the UK, it's fairly flat, and the Cairnwell's only 600 odd metres high. And I read that you can get altitude sickness from 2,500 metres and higher. And Col De La Bonette is something like 2,470 something. So I was like, I'm probably a little bit out with those numbers for the people picking me up in the comments. I was like, if I can climb 30 metres higher, I can qualify for altitude sickness, which is a really cool thing. So I got out, and this is stating the obvious, right? But when you get out, the air is just a couple of degrees above freezing, and they put snow gates on for a lot of the year because, you know, through spring, autumn, winter, spring, it's mostly shut because there's snow and it's not safe to drive there, which is great. You know, I understand that. When you got there, there's still snow on the ground, which is like absolutely amazing. When you back down on the coast in Nice or Monaco, what have you, it's like 30 odd degrees. So you go from 30 degrees to freezing in a few hours just by driving up this mountain, which is amazing. So I thought, this is great. So I jump out of the car, I park up, there's nobody there, took a photograph of the little sign to prove that I'd done it, and decided to sort of climb up this scree. And I didn't get altitude sickness, but I got vertigo because I'm not built for mountains, it would seem. So I got to what I think was 2,500 metres, and I sat there the air is thin, it's cold, it kind of rasps your lungs a bit, and it's a beautiful feeling. But I had to sort of slither back down on my bum. So because I didn't sort of climb down, so I came down this mountain on my arse, drove the car back, and as again, you know, this is a 2-day trip. This is real short. There's no slack in the schedule. You dash back in the car, think, yeah, I've done it. Really good feeling. I've climbed up and I've got an altitude sickness. And then it was like a greyish fabric seat, but I'd gotten real like wet, shaly mud on my arse from having slid down the mountain. And I gave it back. And I didn't take spare clothes because I was fed up of looking like a Michelin man wearing all my clothes. So I travelled back looking like I'd messed myself. It was so embarrassing. And so, is there any problems with the car? I'm like, no. And actually the car was fine. And then looked at the driver's seat and then sort of looked at me as I walked. And I could kind of feel them looking at the back of my head, like looking me up and down. Oh, there's the Englishman that messed himself. So yeah, I was the Englishman that messed himself up the Col De La Bonette. But it is magnificent. I've had other trips in that area and over into Italy from there because it isn't far to go. And I got hooked on Col anything. So Col, I think, I don't speak French, but I think it relates to a dormant volcano cone. It's a geographical description of sorts. But I very quickly twigged that anywhere Col is going to be good. Whereas in the UK, Col is the name of the bloke that fixes your radiators, right? Or, you know, Col's the guy that does welding for cash. In France, Col means that, and means exciting roads. So I went and found the Mortirolo pass. So this is, I would fly to Milan for this. This would be the way to go and go north from there. And it caught my attention because a lot of cyclists go there and a lot of like proper hardcore cyclists go and do it. And those masochists are into those kind of crazy steep climbs. So I thought this would be a good place to go. And the only Latin I know, I learned from Monty Python, which is Romanus Eunt Domus, which people might remember from the life of Brian as people called Roman, they go the house, when they're trying to say Romans go home. Anyway, but one tiny little bit I remembered was like Mort, I think means death, and it was Mortirolo Pass. I'm like, this is great. This is the pass of death. Now, this is where we really got into trouble and we really had to sort of change the game because a few of us went and ticked all the boxes and we lost a car in a ravine. And when I say lost a car, I don't mean like misplaced it and there was nobody to blame but us, but basically a car crashed into a ravine. It wasn't like hundreds of feet deep like a cowboy movie, but it was definitely more than a ditch and the car was definitely in it. So we thought, what on earth do we do now? So we rang the rental company and there's a few of us, so we had a couple of other cars in the same little convoy and said, well, the car's broken down and we've left it at this place and we're overnighting here tonight. But we've ticked all the boxes, everybody's safe, it's off the road, nothing to worry about, sorry. And they said, fine. Then they called back and said, well, will you be needing another car to continue your journey? Because you've ticked all the extra whatnot, we'll provide you with one. So, okay, we will. So we went to I forget the town, but that same neck of the woods, and collected an identical car to drive in. Then we went and had a pizza and, you know, just taking in the scenery and what have you. And please remember that this is not tourist zone, this is out in the sticks. And we started to feel a bit bad about having left this car in a ravine. So we scrounged a tow rope from somewhere and we thought, well, let's go and tow the car out of the ravine. So we found where it was, we drove back, we tied a rope to the tow hook at the front of one car and scrambled down the ravine and tied it to the back of the other car and then started to sort of reverse to pull it out. I mean, the car was knackered, there's no nice way of saying it. But at least we wanted to do was recover it to a safe place because we did have a pang of guilt, believe it or not. We didn't go there to kill the car, absolutely not. So we started to pull it back, but then we were burning the clutch out of the car, pulling it, because I'm not exaggerating. When I mean a ravine, I don't mean a bit of a slope you can push it up. It's like it's physically impossible. So we're kind of pushing and hauling at this thing. And then, of course, the rope's quite tight. And the tow car, just sort of slipped forward. It was like the end of the Italian Job. And perhaps if we'd gone to recreate that, it would have been a more successful trip. But it was proper cliffhanger. I'm not exaggerating when I say cliffhanger stuff. So, oh, bugger, now we're really in trouble. Well, now what are we going to do? So, okay, we're going to have to cut the rope and just leave the car there and just run away. Basically, run away was the defence. But the rope was pulled so tight between the two because the bottom car had slipped that we couldn't undo the knots, and didn't have a knife because you can't carry a knife when you travel with budget airlines and your hand luggage. But somebody had a cigarette lighter, so we basically burnt through the rope, and then there's sort of plastic on fire because if you ever burn a nylon rope, it's quite flammable. So that was just dreadful. So I apologise wholeheartedly to the rental company that would have gone to collect this broken down car. and found a car with its clutch burnt out, and then another car in a ravine with a piece of smouldering rope still attached to it. So at that point, we thought maybe we need a more considered approach, and perhaps one slightly less mental and dangerous. So after that, we took a slightly different route. I mentioned before about really enjoying researching the history of old race circuits and old race drivers, and not the obvious James Hunt, Lewis Hamilton stuff. I'm talking way back in the early era of motorsport, and I started to really enjoy understanding how and where a circuit had been built. Anyway, I was in the Netherlands. I was in the Netherlands anyway, in an Opel Corsa, which is I know this is a car channel, and I'm a fan of cheap and cheerful stuff, but that car feels like everybody that worked on that project hated themselves and hated the end product and hated their customers. It's a really horrible thing. There, I've said it. It's out there now, offending everybody today. And I wanted to go to Zandvoort, so I drove to Zandvoort, which is on the coast. Now, of course, it's back on the F1 calendar, so everybody knows what it is and where it is. But until recently, it wasn't that popular a circuit. It had been a very busy F1 circuit back in the day, and then it was kind of in the doldrums for a bit. So I wanted to go and visit, and I'd read the story that most of the circuit was constructed in, I think, 43 or thereabouts, in the midst of the war, when obviously Germany was, or the Nazis were controlling the Netherlands, and the mayor had tricked the local German commander into building him a promenade, because he said, well, look, when the war is over, surely you want a lovely boulevard where you can march along and you know, display your Nazi triumph to the world. And the guy was like, yeah, great idea, let's do it. Bit in German. And they built this sort of seafront promenade, part of which then immediately after the war, it's actually a nice place to visit as a tourist, but then became part of the race circuit. But they had to buy off various people, because allotments, as we have in the UK, little houses, you have a plot of land and you grow your spuds on it. And the Dutch are quite into that too. So some of that land was allotments. So it wasn't as easy as just buying a field and sticking a race circuit on it. And one particularly cantankerous old git apparently had said, I don't really want to sell my piece of my vegetable plot, but I will do so if I can name the corner that runs through it. So they said, yeah, fine. So this was at the time when the Tarzan films had just come out. So he said, I want to call this Tarzan Corner. Tarzanbocht, I think you said in Dutch. And that's the first turn on the Zandvoort F1 circuit, is this Tarzan Corner. So I like, you know, you might know this already, but I kind of like this sort of stuff. So I went to go to take a look. So when I got there, the place was completely shut. So I kind of drove the perimeter of the circuit, and then I walked it, because it's set amongst sand dunes. It's really nice. It's quite a nice part of the world. And then I noticed at the end of the straight, and I now know it's where the doctor's car and what have you starts from, behind where the pack would start, the gate was open. And I thought, I've come all this way, I can't not go and have a look at Zandvoort. So this now really what I'm talking about is trespass. So the disclaimer now says, none of this ever happened. I'm an outrageous liar and this didn't happen. Okay, right? Especially if my mum's watching. I sat for about 20 to 30 minutes and there wasn't a soul. There was nobody in the circuit, there's nobody on the circuit, nobody around. So I thought, I'm just going to drive on and have a look. So I hadn't, for all of my sort of rule bending, I'd never done anything that was blatantly illegal before. And this is illegal, you shouldn't do it. People have done it there was some arse that trespassed at Brands Hatch in the middle of a live race, and it is stupid. It is stupid and dangerous. All I'll say is I picked my moment, there was nobody there, it was fine. So I drove on in this Corsa, in the correct rotation of the track. And I thought, I need to do this really quick, because I needed to be in and out. So first gear, second gear, and just as I hit second and was really caning it, the car cut out just as this woman stepped out in the pits, waving a clipboard. And I thought, in my stupidity, that she'd somehow got some magic remote control and had disabled my car, because she waved and I was like, oof. And I now know it's because I hit the limiter. So she came over and she said, she was quite angry, which I totally get. And she said, like, what the hell are you doing? We're closed to the public, not anything. And I just said, look, I just couldn't help myself. Like, I've always wanted to come to this circuit. I'm never going to be able to afford to race here, because track days at Zandvoort are very expensive. I'm here, I write for a couple of magazines, trust me, I just want to do a lap of the circuit. And she was actually quite understanding. I think she worked for the press department or something. So she was in doing office work and just seen me. So she understood. She wasn't very happy, but she understood. So I don't recommend anybody else try this. Now, because you can't turn against yourself on a circuit under any circumstances, it's not safe to do so. So I had to complete a lap. So instantly she said, right, you have to drive off the circuit, but you've got to go this way. So I thought, I'm in here. This is great. I'm going to get my lap. But she sat in with me and she wouldn't let me go very fast. So I'm going as quick as I can. And she keeps saying, slow down, slow down, slow down, in that sort of direct way that Dutch people do. And then I said, oh, is this Tarzan? I was trying to get some info. And I said, this is Tarzan Corner? Yes. And she was very yes, no. And then we got to, and I don't remember the turn number, but there's a Dutch racer called Arie, and it was something like Luitjendijk, and it's quite difficult for an English mouth to pronounce. So I said, what's this corner? She said, it's Arie Luitjendijk. And I thought, that's my key to a second lap. So finished the circuit, and it is a phenomenal circuit. It's really banked. You're in amongst the sand dunes. I mean, it's almost too good for F1. It's just an awesome place. There's some great footage on YouTube, by the way. They did a backwards car race there once. It's set in black. I think they were DAF cars, and they just raced saloon cars backwards around the whole circuit, which is great fun. Anywho, so I'm trying to make friends with this lady who understandably hates my guts. And just before I had to exit, my key to another lap was, I said, what was that? I said, you have to tell me where I need to get off the circuit. And just before we got to that point, knowing what it was, I said, what's the name of that? Arie what? Oh, I missed the exit. I'm really sorry. We'll have to go round again. And I think I tried it again, and she grabbed hold of the steering wheel. So I did 2 laps, I think it was, of Zandvoort in a hateful Opel Corsa, and took it back. Now, there's no damage to the car, which is good, but I would still love to think that somebody's first car, there'd be some kid happily zipping around in a battered old Corsa in the Netherlands now, because this was a few years ago, or some happy granny going to the library or doing something nice, sat in a very ordinary little car that's actually done 2 laps of the Dutch F1 circuit unwittingly. And I started to, I don't know if this is the right time to plug the book, but later on with these trips, I started to leave copies of the book, Nothing Handles Like a Rental Car, in the spare wheel well of the car, because a lot of cars don't have spare wheels, they'll have tyre foams. There's nothing in it, so I would leave a copy of the book and just put guess where I've been in it. So I don't know if these cars go to auction, people buy them, but it's a little bit naughty, but it's a bit of history to the car that, hey, adds value, famous car. Yeah, there we go. After that, I picked a trip that was quite a lot closer to home, but still abroad, and I went over to Ireland. Now, the reason for this trip is to explore what I believe is the forerunner to Formula One. There was a guy called Gordon Bennett who basically sponsored a number of balloon races and car races in order to sell newspapers. And in, I think it was 1903 or maybe 1906, he wanted to sponsor a car race, because this was the time when cars were becoming exciting and new machinery and really exciting. And of course, no social media back then, obviously. So people would buy newspapers to read about it. So the newspapers would sponsor motoring events. And you've seen like the Daily Mail and the Sun and other stuff had sponsored football teams and stuff in order to flog papers. So Gordon Bennett, British viewers will probably know that phrase is an exclamation used if something spectacular, like Gordon Bennett, wow. Probably just old people like me doing that. But he was a real person, Gordon Bennett Jr. Gordon Bennett Jr. was a newspaper magnate. I think his family was Scottish. He grew up in New York, and they did very well selling papers, and New York and media was booming and all the rest of it. But young Gordon was a bit of a tearaway, and he was betrothed to some society heiress, some fancy type in New York. And he went to meet her family, and he basically got so drunk that he pissed on the fireplace on Christmas Day in front of their whole family. And of course, they're all totally ashamed of him. So they said, well, go and sell some newspapers in London. So they sent him to London with a remit to really grow circulation of their newspapers. So he decided, and he was an absolute terror. He did some outrageous stuff that's worthy of a book on its own, and I'm not going to get down that route because you'll never shut me up otherwise. So he basically sponsored some balloon races and then some motor races. So the early ones were held in France. And I think the rule was that the nationality of the winning driver set the destination for the following race. So I think it might have been Selwyn Edge, but I'm not entirely sure. But in essence, it went to Ireland. And Ireland at that time, putting all politics aside, hey, I'm wearing a green shirt, was part of the UK. You couldn't hold car racing in the UK because they'd recently set a law that said anybody, the speed limit was something mental like 10 or 15 miles an hour, and cars had to be preceded by a chap waving a red flag, and that doesn't make for much of a motor race. So the Republic of Ireland, or Ireland at the time, agreed to host the race there, which I think was absolutely fab. So one nice little facet that I learned from this, and probably people know it already, was that this is where we get our national racing colours from. So Germany has a silver arrows. German national racing colour is silver. The Italians have red, as we know from Ferrari. French have blue, as you'll see regularly with Alpine. And British, we have British racing green. But green's an Irish colour, right? It's not a British colour. But this was as a thank you to Ireland for letting the British host the first race there. And it was a street circuit, so it lent itself very well to being able to visit. Now, the Irish Tourist Board to this day promote this route. They want people to go. They want people to go and do it, which is fantastic, really. So you can either take the ferry over to Dunleary or fly to Dublin, and it's not too far from there. And it's a figure-of-8 circuit. There are a lot of really kind of cool anecdotes and a bit grisly as well, and I don't know whether we should dwell on that, but a lot of the locals, because you're racing in a rural thing, a lot of the locals hadn't seen many or indeed any cars before, and they certainly hadn't seen a racing car. So they were getting run over because they couldn't comprehend things coming at them that quickly, which sounds absurd, but this is what happened. So people were getting mashed by these cars because they were so excited and transfixed that they couldn't jump out of the way in time. The race was quite an attrition. A lot of the cars failed, and in those days it was commonplace, although not compulsory, to have a riding mechanic. So you'd have a driver, and just sat behind them, kind of over their shoulder, you'd have a chap who'd jump out and change tyres and top up fuel and do stuff, which is like really cool. Like, I don't want iDrive. I want like Derek, who fixes my BMW, sat in the back seat, who'll just jump out and fix it for me. And that's what they did. Now that race was a race over a set amount of laps, and it garnered huge publicity and helped sell lots and lots of newspapers. And it was won by a chap called the Red Devil, who was a Belgian who was racing for the German team, because this was done on nationality. So it was Germany versus France versus the UK. That's how it was done then. So Germany won, but actually their driver was Belgian. There's a guy called Camille Janazzi, and he was driving, I think he was driving a Mercedes, or it might have been a Delahaye. Anywho, he's driving for Germany. And it was such a dangerous race, and there were fatalities all over and what have you, and it was all very scary. And he had a premonition immediately after the race, and he said, he had a kind of a dream where he said, I will one day die in a Mercedes. And it's understood that he meant he would die racing a Mercedes. And that's not that they're any more dangerous than any other manufacturers at that time, but racing was insanely dangerous. The safety helmets, of course, weren't really strapped on. People didn't have seatbelts because they preferred to be thrown from a car in a crash, because their greatest fear was being trapped in the wreckage and burnt alive. So it was really grisly stuff. And perversely, his premonition came true. Now, like a lot of the drivers, he was a wealthy man, because this is to this day it's an expensive thing to go motor racing, unless you rent a car and you dick around abroad. And he was quite aristocratic, and he was out hunting, and he was hunting wild boar in, I think it was in France or Belgium. And he was out with a group of friends, and for a laugh, so they're shooting these wild boar, for a laugh, he hid in the bushes and made the noise of a pig to scare his friends. But of course, they did what anybody would do on a pig hunting trip, and they shot him, thinking he was so good, they thought it was a pig, so they shot him. Of course, overcome with grief, they dragged him out, and he was still alive, and they got hold of an ambulance, and they put him in an ambulance, and he died on the way to hospital, and it was a Mercedes ambulance. So he actually died, his premonition came true. Now, I shouldn't be laughing at this, but it's kind of like, what an absolutely bizarre death. The interest for me in planning these trips, and I'm a massive fan of Google Earth and Street View, because you can really plot these things. And when I started doing this, it was newish tech. So plotting the route, because you don't have a lot of time to do it. The thing I also get great pleasure from is buying books. This is weird to be talking to YouTube about books, and reading and learning, like, who won the race and where did he come from and what was his story. And, you know, the Red Devil dying in a Mercedes is a great story. And you don't always find these stories online. You find them in print, you find them in old magazines. So I'm terrible for buying dusty old magazines and trawling through to get these little tidbits of stories. And that, for me, is a huge part of the trip as well. And that was a really magnificent thing. We took photography of the car outside a kind of a ruined stately home because, of course, when Ireland became independent, there was quite an uprising and, you know, storming of the post office and what have you. And a lot of the landowners were of sort of English descent, and a lot of those places got wrecked. So we found this stately home, and it had, on the Gordon Bennett route, and it had figures like you'd see in church, where you'd see saints, you know, in stone, and every single one had the head shot off. And we only realised afterwards, looking back at it, that somebody at some point has used this place as a firing range, and there we were doing that. Again, this is a nice place to go because everybody we went to was sincerely super friendly. And the car scene in Ireland is quite interesting, right? The tax in Ireland is crazy on newish cars. A very expensive place. So turning up in interesting cars in these places, you know, often gets a bit of attention, but people are sincerely interested. We made some really nice people on the trip. I'm going to tell you one little anecdote, and this is true. We finished in a pub because I really like to finish in a pub. And we had a few beers, and we had a friend come with us in a cameraman, and he had an Opel Insignia, and there was like parking in a barn, and the barn had a stone gateway like that, and I had a couple of Guinnesses because when in Rome and all the rest of it, and he said, will my car fit through the gateway to the car park? I said, yeah, just come through quick, and it just, as he drove through, it sheared both wing mirrors off like cartoon style, just both of them came off. So that was, we got some bother for that. We sat in this pub and we're having a couple of Guinness, and it was opposite the town courthouse where people would go to stand in front of the judge and what have you. And in came, and this is absolutely true, a security guard with a peak cap and the thing with the epaulets. And so he's the security guard for, like, I don't know, Securitas or Group 4, whatever the Irish equivalent is. So he's a court guard, and he is handcuffed to some scrote in a prison tracksuit and like tattooed neck. And the pair of them come into the bar together, handcuffed together. And this is lunchtime. So I think what had happened is, breaking proceedings, one of them said, I fancy a pint. So they didn't say a word to each other. They just walked into this pub, handcuffed to each other. They both ordered a pint. They both paid separately. They both drank a pint at exactly the same rate, put it down, and then walked out together, handcuffed together. And it's like, only in Ireland would you see that. So that really tickled me. But it's a great place. It is a great place to explore. And there's a lot of other routes I would like to, like the Wild Atlantic Way in the west coast of Ireland. I've never really done in earnest. So that's definitely a place to go back to. So that was a gentler trip with a deeper history than some of the stuff we do. From there, touching on Gordon Bennett, I want to move on to Targa Florio, back to Italy. Targa Florio, you may well know the name, but it's a street race again, and it's on the island of Sicily, off the south coast of Italy. And this started not long after the Gordon Bennett races. And Vincenzo Florio spoke to Gordon Bennett Jr. about the races and said, I want to do something here. And I think some of this comes from publicity, some of it comes from ego, and some of it just comes from wanting to back something exciting. Now, he was a wealthy guy. I think a lot of his money came from wine, and he wanted to get people to Sicily to enjoy racing. And he was quite a character. I mean, he got married fairly young. He came back from his honeymoon, and in his baggage was a live crocodile. He'd bought a live crocodile, and of course this isn't very animal friendly in today's day and age, but back then, I mean, like, you know, anything to declare at customs, yeah, I've got 400 cigarettes, a straw donkey, oh, by the way, I've got this crocodile, you know, I'd love to try and check a crocodile in with Ryanair or EasyJet. I have a particular hatred of Ryanair, but anyway. So I wanted to go and trace this circuit. Now, this circuit is a street circuit, and it's changed many times over the years, but it basically runs through the hills of Sicily, and it's a long distance. It's like, I think the shortest was something like 30 kilometres, the longest might be 80 or 100. I'm probably out with those numbers because it's a while since I've done it. So back hiring a car under a different name again and getting a Fiat 500, which is pretty good because I have a theory that, like when in Rome, you should do the thing. So, yeah, Italian car, even though I think those are actually built in Poland, if I'm right. Me and a couple of friends went and did the Targa Florio route. Now, as I mentioned before, the history of the racers to me was particularly appealing, and there's so many people have raced in Targa Florio, famous names you'll have heard of. One is a guy called Vaccarella. I think it's Nino Vaccarella. He was a stalwart. He appeared in many of the sort of the peak races at Targa Florio. And he was a school teacher. He lived in Sicily and his day job was a school teacher. So to see him turning out for some of the top racing marks was fantastic. And the reason he was so good is the same reason that whenever you go to the Nürburgring, you used to get lapped by Sabine Schmitz. Because when you live there and you do lap after lap after lap, you know every kink and every dust and every pothole, and you get to be really quick. And even to this day, you can see they've got like VV, and it looks a bit like the Volkswagen thing, but you see VV painted on stone walls up in the mountains, and it means Viva Vaccarella, like go Vaccarella, which is just amazing. So I loved discovering the story of that and then driving the route. Sadly, a lot of the route is on absolutely dreadful roads, like some of the worst roads in Europe. Total subsidence, potholes, mess, and all sorts. And we got stopped by a guy in uniform in a stick-it-up Panda, like an official-looking Panda, and he claimed to be like secretary for the Ministry of Roads, and he was like, "What are you doing here?" And we told him, and he was so proud of his roads, and he had a uniform like an African dictator. It was spectacular. You'd literally think he'd won world wars on his own, this guy, and he was the deputy assistant for the Minister of Roads, and said, "We're doing the Targa Florio route," and he was so proud of it. But I thought, if you spent a bit less on uniforms and medal, like you don't need a medal, do you, to be in charge of tarmac, and a bit more on the roads, then maybe more people would come. And it's a spicy place. It's not a particularly wealthy place, Sicily. There's a lot of mafia and corruption there has been over the years, and I'm saying this as somebody that loves the place. And one of the ruses that the mafia had was in taking control of waste contracts. So if you go to Napoli years ago, you could see at night, you think, oh, they like their bonfires, but it's not. It's instead of the mafia controlling the waste companies and recycling stuff, they just fly tip it and burn it. And we found the same, and I can't prove this, of course, but this is what sort of locals hinted at, that there was kind of fly tip rubbish and industrial waste in the most beautiful. You've got these beautiful like plane trees and yew trees and beautiful scenery, and then you'd have a ditch full of just appalling crap. So it's a really weird place. The original start-finish line, they've talked about doing it up over the years, it isn't dissimilar to that at Reims. But again, we stopped and we got hassled by people wanting money off us and stuff, and it was like, it was a bit lively. But on the other hand, it was also a beautiful place, and it was great to follow that route in an Italian car and feel like you're part of it and come home only having spent €200, 200 quid. And I just think it's an amazing little taste. And I've got a thing for food, so I had, I never want the English menu, I just want to try something. They said, oh, why don't you try polpo? I'm like, okay. I now know that polpo means octopus. And the chef, we stopped in a place called Cefalù, and the chef came out and he showed us like how it was cooked, and it was really cool. But then you get other little tidbits. Someone said, have you been to Crowley's Cottage? So Crowley's Cottage, right, sounds like a service station, doesn't it? So like a service station on the M3 or at the M25, like, yeah, I'm running a bit late, mate, I've got to get 50 quid's worth of diesel at Crowley Cottage. In Sicily, this is Alistair Crowley, who was described as, I think they called him the wickedest man in England, and he was an occultist. He was basically a Satanist, complete nut job. And in the 30s and 20s and 30s, he was forever casting spells. And if you look, he looks terrifying. He looks absolutely terrifying. But in order to get away from all of the hullabaloo in England, where he was wanted, he bought this little cottage in Sicily and encouraged his followers to come and visit him there. And he made a drink out of cat's blood, which killed one of his followers. And this is on this route, right? And so you go and do Targa Florio, think motor history, and you find this tiny, weird little, it's like, why am I looking at this derelict cottage? And the story goes that when Mussolini came to power in Italy, he said, I'm not having that nut job in my country, and evicted him, just kicked him out straight away. So it was like, it feels a million miles away from home and normality. And for not a lot of money to be able to taste that, not the cat blood, that would be disgusting, but to have octopus and look at the roads and talk to the deputy junior man full of medals who's responsible for these crap roads. And just to imagine for a minute, tiny fraction with a gear change that you're in something spicy and you're loving it is great. And I honestly, and it's the same with the other trips, I wouldn't swap it. I wouldn't swap the vehicle or the process for something flash. And I've been lucky to have owned and driven some interesting cars. But you can do it for peanuts and you can give it back. You don't care where you park it. You don't care about insurance. You don't care about even refueling it if you tick the box. Just give it them back. It's transport. So that was quite liberating in a way to be able to do that. And there's sure as hell no way I would have taken anything too spicy and left it in some of these corners of Sicily that we ended up, because it's, you know, a lot of, I know the place is a lot better now for mafia control and stuff, but I've never seen army manning checkpoints in Western Europe as you enter a village, because they're concerned about that gangster control and stuff. That, to see a soldier with a gun and sandbags in Western Europe is a bit like, oh yeah, this is quite exciting. So that's the story of Targa Florio. I wholly recommend getting married, bringing a crocodile back from your honeymoon, drinking poisoned cat's blood and meeting the minister, because, I mean, how else are you going to spend 200 quid, right? My interest in history and in cars is mirrored quite nicely by the output of British manufacturers like Caterham and Lotus, which I absolutely love, and Morgan. Lotus threatened to sue me once, and maybe someday when I'm feeling really brave, I will tell you why, because there's a great story behind that. The Morgan Motor Company are one of those kind of boutique businesses that superficially you wonder how on earth they hang on. The styling of the products and the vehicles, it doesn't appeal to everyone. They are kind of peculiar. They are also incredibly cool, and when you get to know them, when you've driven one, they get under your skin. It's a very strange feeling, and very few other manufacturers have a car that leaves you predisposed to loving them, frankly. They're really cool things. I'll come back to why in a moment. Living in the East Midlands, there's a statue in the grounds of Nottingham Castle to a chap called Captain Albert Ball. And this is a guy I've really, really kind of studied his life. He was a World War I fighter ace. And he was one of the top Allied pilots in the First World War. Not like top 10, but he was a top pilot. And he was an interesting character because he didn't come from that public school tally-ho, shoot a Jerry nonsense that a lot of them came from. He was a very modest guy. He didn't drink. He didn't like sleeping in the barracks with everybody else. He liked sleeping in a tent next to his plane just in case anybody needed it. And he went through all of the training, and of course, being a pilot in those days, you would get butchered in the air fairly quickly. And he quickly discovered that he was actually a very good pilot and was starting to shoot down a lot of enemy aircraft. And he wrote to his father saying, I'm becoming to feel like a murderer, which is a really interesting thing. This I'm becoming to feel like a murderer thing stuck in my head, because you get those boys' own comics and war films where everybody's a hero and it's grisly and stuff. But this was a guy that in his time knew that what he was doing was butchery. Now, of course, it's kill or be killed, and it was a long time ago and a century ago and so on. But this kind of struck a chord with me, this guy, this kind of a reluctant hero. So I kind of dug a bit deeper. And I discovered that he was one of the first customers of the Morgan Motor Company for their early cycle cars and three-wheelers. And he bought one, he got promoted, and he sort of went through the ranks. And he got an early three-wheeler, and he described it as being the closest thing to flying without leaving the ground. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. Then I learned that where he had died, he'd been supposedly shot down by the brother of the Red Baron. I don't know if that's entirely true, because I've read different versions of the same story. But of course, his father was absolutely stricken with grief. And his father travelled to the front line in France where he passed away, where the plane had crashed, and found the field and said to the local farmer, I'm buying your field because my son died here. And the farmer must have thought he was a bit crazy, but he said, okay, fine. And what he did, his father put a concrete stone on the spot where his son died and then gave the field back to the farmer and said, you can do whatever you want, but never touch the stone. And I thought, this is quite interesting. And it was coming up to Remembrance Day. So I got in touch with the Morgan Motor Company, said, I'd really love to pay homage to this guy. I've really enjoyed learning his story and the military history and all the rest of it. And they were great. They stumped up a three-wheeler. So they gave me a three-wheeler. So a couple of us drove from the statue in the grounds of Nottingham Castle to this stone, which took me ages to find. I really had to do some sleuthing to find it, because it's just a wet, ploughed field in Nowheresville in northern France with a stone in it. I mean, like, you think about the death and the life and the fight, and you're literally just dead in the mud. It's quite a sombre thing. So we drove to France and laid a wreath and had a drink and raised a toast to Captain Albert Ball. And his dad was an interesting guy as well. His dad went on to be Director General, I believe, of the Austin Motor Company. So he's quite an interesting fella. So I liked telling the story of Ball, and there became like a weird parallel, because I'm quite into old planes as well, between the aircraft, of World War I aircraft, and the Morgan three-wheeler. So they both weighed like 550, 560 kilos. They both had about 80 odd horsepower. And if you get them wrong, they're both going to bite you. So it was quite a cool thing to do. And I was absolutely over the moon when the following year, somebody from like the Three-Wheeler Owners Club got in touch. And bearing in mind that they've made three-wheelers over the years. So the Three-Wheeler Club got in touch and said, do you mind us asking where you went and what you did? Because they'd read the story. And I shared it with them, and they said, well, we'd like to do a rally. We'd like a lot of us to go. So I ended up sort of semi-organising, along with a brilliant chap called Ian, a trip. And what I loved was, this runs now pretty much every year, didn't run during COVID, and they go to a local school, and the local schools know who Albert Ball is, and they go every year and they lay a wreath on this spot and remember, show a bit of thing. Now, what I like about it, it isn't the grisly misery that some of these things can be. It's actually very positive, because the last time I went, because I don't have time to go every single year, there were drivers and cars from Germany, from France, from all over Europe had come. And it was like we're all united in our love of slightly daft and very interesting cars, and united in our love for that, what a stupid load of nonsense war was, and actually we're all the same, let's go and have a beer. And it was really cool, because I speak a few languages, I don't speak any French. And ended up getting quite squiffy with a French bloke with a three-wheeler, and sort of thinking that we understood each other perfectly through mimicking sounds that only three-wheelers make, because they've all got interesting bevel boxes and dodgy drive belts, and how do you fix it and how do you live with it. And it was wonderful, because everybody joined over their love of three-wheelers around this moment. So that was a really great trip. Not a rental car trip, but it was a press fleet bag. I think also, as my career had developed, and as I'd started selling a few stories to magazines and started doing a little bit of YouTube as well, and really building on that, I was getting access to quite a lot of interesting press cars and doing what you might consider to be more sort of conventional reviews, which I'm not very good at and I don't particularly enjoy doing. But the stories of the trips were great. But I was still hooked on those rental car trips, because it's the perfect combination of high jinks, low cost, not away from home for any longer than you need to be, because we've all got families, right? And doing something that you normally read about in magazines, but there's nothing to stop you from doing it yourself. So I've had some great trips, and the Albert Ball one was probably the most meaningful, because I felt like I was just spreading good karma somehow. With a love of Formula One, it's impossible not to be drawn to the lights of Monaco, because it's a pretty lousy race. It's just nose to tail stuff, however you qualify. But the setting, the pompous, ridiculous ostentatiousness of it all is really engaging. And I got reading up on the history of it, and I also got reading up on the history of the San Remo Grand Prix. Now, as you might know, San Remo is just down the coast from Monaco. It's literally, a short drive over the border. Well, actually over two borders, because you're Monaco to France, then France to Italy. And prior to the war, both of these venues really vied for the money of European aristocrats. So the wealthy would go down there, and even to this day, you see the hotels are called things like the Westminster and the Balmoral, trying to sort of give this appeal, or this image of sort of moneyed royals holidaying there. And San Remo was just the same as Monaco. Palm trees, casinos, beautiful grand hotels, people gambling and racing and living. And so they started motor racing there. And I don't know what came first, Monaco or San Remo, for motor racing, but there's an exceptionally long history in San Remo. The problem with San Remo was in the war, it was on the Italian side of the border. So whereas Prince, whatever his name is, of Monaco, basically did deals with the Allies, to the communists, to the Nazis, to the Vichy, to whoever, so his beautiful sugar-coated palace wouldn't be disturbed. San Remo was firmly on the Italian side, and it was on the coast, and it's an industrial port, so it got absolutely battered. So after the war, Monaco went on to be this glistening nonsense that it is today, and I love it, but hey, it's a crazy place. San Remo never really got back on its feet. So that got me. I don't want to do the obvious. I want to do the slightly different. And if I can draw a parallel, Ferrari is Monaco. Monaco is Ferrari. It's shiny, it's fancy, there's no discussing, you know what it is. If you know nothing about racing cars or Formula 1, you will know Ferrari. San Remo is Maserati, where it's got an equal history in many respects, but you always get the impression they're kind of on the coattails. And it's kind of like the enthusiast, or you might even want to say nerd's choice, that might not be quite as good. And I say this as someone who absolutely loves both brands. And so San Remo is like the faded Maserati of it, that's a bit wonky on occasion and sounds and looks glorious, but actually if you scratch the surface, maybe there are shortcomings. So I was very fortunate to make friends with a chap who told a bit of the history of the San Remo Grand Prix. So there's been different iterations of the circuit, and post-war they moved to a place just along the coast called Ospedaletti. So I did the usual deal. I flew down to Nice, different name again, rented a car, drove down the border and did laps of the Ospedaletti circuit. And very little remains of that, but it is a street circuit. So just like Monaco, you can drive around and think, oh, this is Tabac, or oh, this is Portier, or whatever, Saint-Devote. You can do exactly the same at San Remo, but people don't tend to do it because you won't look at the streets, you look at the sea. So you don't look at the streets behind you snaking up the hill, and a lot of it is fairly ordinary architecture. A lot of it's 60s, 70s boxes and stuff, and it's a nice place and all the rest of it, but it isn't as snazzy as Monaco is. So I think it was from 47 to 72, they ran sort of Formula One level, if not always that level, but top flight motorsport events in that town. And I went with a guy I know. My Italian is really terrible. So as we drove around the circuit, we would stop and he would tell me the history of the corner, but he'd tell me the history of the corner in Italian. And one of the corners, I believe, is called something like, it's either Black Chicken or Angry Cockerel or something like that, because we stopped and he'd say, sempre dritto, venestra, something, straight on, something left in Italian. And then he sort of got out the car and he started doing like this chicken, said, oh, was it chicken? See, chicken. And then he's sort of doing like a penis gesture. So it's a male chicken. And it became like some ridiculous game of charades with a fellow motorsport enthusiast in a side street in Italy. Why? I remember as he's talking to me over his shoulder, there was like a Chinese family, and the guy's washing up and he's just got a cigarette and he's just staring at me like, what the hell are these idiots doing here? So I love that. Racing on public roads isn't cool, it isn't safe, and none of this ever happened. So what's interesting is to try and do a lap and see how close you were to the original speed without maiming any school kids. What's cool is that the start-finish line, there is a police station. It's a lot more like a little concrete hut next to a pedestrian crossing. And outside, and I go to this place quite often because I love it, there's one of those crappy plastic garden chairs that just collapse the minute you sit on it. And there's always a Carabinieri or a Guardia Civile, or I never quite know what they are in Italy, sat in a glorious uniform, just smoking a cigarette, just watching the traffic. And I have this thing where I want to do one full lap of the circuit before he's finished his cigarette. So I'll sit there and park up, wait for him to light it, and then it's like, go, go, go. I've got Murray Walker in my head, down to the straight, up through the hill, up through the town, back down through the twisties, back round, beautiful view. It's easy to get distracted by the view of the sea there because it is spectacular. And back before he's finished his cigarette. I've done this many times. Different coppers there stood or sat having a cigarette. Not once has any of them ever said, why are you in a French plated hire car putting black 11s all the way down the straight? They just kind of watch you and do it. And you will always get overtaken by a moped in Italy. It doesn't matter what you're driving or how quick you're going. So that's another really nice place to visit and to see on the cheap, and it is awesome. I had a pizza there where, first time in my life I had a pizza with some point, is it called Fiorentina? I'm not entirely sure, but pizza with an egg on the top, and I thought, are they doing this to me for a joke? And it's like, this is the best pizza I've ever had. It's just spectacular. So many, many reasons to visit San Remo. And if you're bored, you can go and look at Monaco when you're done. Many of these trips have been done on the cheap, and it's never the intention to deliberately go and break stuff. That's not the idea. The idea is to visit a part of the world that you haven't seen before, learn stuff, new food, new people, and get a glimpse into what racing was like 100 years ago, 120 years ago when it was in its infancy, and to do it for a couple £100. And I'm hooked on that. That PJ O'Rourke said, nothing handles like a rental car. That's the name of the book that I wrote. Richard Porter said, I haven't read this book, but his last one was good, so, you know, take your chances, which was very nice of him to say so. That's kind of a how-to, and all the other trips that I got to. Okay, awful plug over with. I think I want to finish with one of my favourite trips, and it isn't a rental car. It was actually in a bit of British Leyland CAC, because growing up in the Midlands, we were always sort of indoctrinated that Rover and Austin and its last legs, and it was all rubbish. And I kind of wanted to see if this was true or not. So manufacturers in the old days would demonstrate the reliability of their products by either taking them rallying or doing high-level motorsports such as F1. So I decided to combine the two. I wanted to do a little bit of the Paris-Dakar route, and I wanted to do the Casablanca street circuit in Morocco, where they used to hold F1. And so I did. So I bought a Metro Quest for £299. It was 300 quid, and I found a pound in the ashtray, and drove it to the nearest piece of desert to my house in Leicestershire, which is, if you get a French map of North Africa, it's basically the top end of the Sahara, near a place with lots of O's and U's and Z's in it, and there's a little symbol of a palm tree. And I drove it there. Now, I didn't prep the car for a couple of reasons. Number one is I'm a cheapskate. And number two, it didn't seem in keeping with the challenge. The challenge was to test the car as it is. And I have this kind of mechanical understanding that if you change one part, you must change the part that's connected to it. And if you change the wire, you've got to change the bulb, you've got to change the alternator. Before you know it, you've restored a car that, why? So I wanted to see what a pensioner-owned Metro from Nottingham could actually do. So the hydrogas was shot at the front, so it's kind of on bump stops at the front, so it looked like an old drag racer with its bum in the air. Other than that, it was an amazing little car. It was exceptionally frugal. It did 80, 90 mile an hour screaming its head off all day long. We did a few naughty things with it. We took the ferry over from, I don't even pronounce it, Algeciras in southern Spain, near Gibraltar, over to North Africa, over to Morocco on the ferry. And normally when you get on the ferry, it's very close and you carefully open the door so you don't bump anybody. But of course, there were a few of us. So as a friend brought along a Ledbury-built Maestro, which is a particularly archaic piece of transport. And we took great pleasure in just boom, 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 opening doors on each other, keying each other's cars, and doing all the horrible, nasty things that you should never do to a car just because we could. We got off the other end. Morocco is a lively place to go. Out in the countryside, you very quickly realise that this is a fairly impoverished place, and prattling around in old cars is a bit of a poor show. On the other hand, I think we went to places and spent money that had never seen tourists in however long, and it felt nice to actually go and do that. I had some of the best black olives, the best orange juice, the best chicken I've ever had. Just amazing in backstreet places. We went and did, I'm also a fan of the film Casablanca, so we did the street circuit, of which absolutely zero remains of the original route. You're just driving on modern roads in some of the most hateful traffic. You realise how good modern cars are, because the air there makes you feel sick instantly with the smog and the cack from the traffic. And I know that they're working on that, so it's not a criticism, but polluting old trucks and smells. It was like Birmingham or London in the 70s and 80s. It was pretty horrible stuff. So there wasn't a lot left of the circuit, but we finished up in, and I think there were probably a few of these in Sam's Bar. So if you're familiar with the film Casablanca, this one was owned by a lady who claimed to have been the US ambassador to Morocco for many years, and she was clearly an aficionado of the film, and there was a chap called Sam playing the piano, and even the pot plants and the drinks and everything were exactly as per the film, but it was behind steel doors with armed guards on it in a saucy part of town. So that felt like a real adventure. Eventually we drove down to the desert, and bear with me because I'm rambling with this story now, and it's odd. You look at the sand on films and you imagine it to be soft like the beach, and it's like sandpaper. It's a coarse, rough, dangerous, stinking hot place with no aircon in a car that started life in the Midlands, 40 years before. And the cars are absolutely fabulous. And we ended up in a little place and we ate, and the bill came and we had coffee and cheesecake. I don't know why we had coffee and cheesecake. And I thought, well, what do we do now, having driven all this way? And I said to the waiter, what do you think of British cars? And he didn't speak great English, but he had Bentley, Rolls Royce. And yeah. I said, what do you think about a Rover Metro Quest? And he looked a bit confused, and I gave him the keys and I said, there you go, mate. I said, how about I'll swap you this cheesecake and coffee for a Rover Metro Quest 1.1. And he was absolutely over the moon. So I swapped that car for lunch and cadged a lift and eventually flew home. And I love to think of the Rover Metro Quest now amongst the camels and the road trains in the desert, providing excellent transport and dispelling the myth that all British cars are rubbish, because they're not. We done?